Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
When my best friend and I bought a couple of cheap lots in that subdivision, we thought we were making the smartest investment of our lives. We couldn't have imagined how much chaos those patches of dirt would stir up years down the line. Back then, the place was so quiet it was almost eerie. A half-empty area with hardly any signs of life. There were maybe one or two houses scattered around, and the rest was nothing but trees, overgrown grass, and the occasional deer wandering through. The lots were dirt cheap, practically being given away, and without a homeowners association breathing down our necks or handing out ridiculous rules, it seemed like a no-brainer. We figured we could do whatever we wanted without someone nitpicking every detail. He dove right in, built a modest house on his lots, and settled in like a pioneer staking his claim. Meanwhile, I held on to mine, thinking I'd build something later when the time felt right, or maybe just sell them off for a nice profit. At the time, it felt like we'd found the perfect loophole in the system. Land with no strings attached. We had no idea how tangled those strings would become. I wasn't using the land at all. It just sat there, overgrown and forgotten, a patch of dirt and weeds that I didn't have the time or energy to deal with. So when he came to me with the offer, it felt like the perfect solution. He said he'd handle everything, the taxes, the upkeep, and any maintenance that popped up. In return, he could use the land for whatever he wanted. It sounded fair, even generous, considering I wasn't doing anything with it myself. I agreed, and just like that, we had a deal. For years it was exactly what you'd hope for in an arrangement like this. No headaches, no bickering, just a simple agreement between two friends. He kept his word, taking care of the place as if it were his own. Meanwhile, I didn't have to worry about overgrown grass or letters from the county about unkempt property. It was a win-win, plain and simple. No drama, no stress. Just good practical use of some cheap, forgotten land. Then, about 10 years ago, everything changed. Out of nowhere, a developer swooped in and bought up the remaining lots, transforming the quiet, forgotten stretch of land into a construction zone. Before long, houses started popping up like weeds after a rainstorm. And of course, with those houses came something I'd never wanted to deal with. An HOA. It didn't take long for the rules to start rolling in, and they covered everything. How big your house had to be, what kind of vehicles could sit in your driveway, and even where they could be parked. It was as if every detail of life on that land had to be micromanaged by people who loved nothing more than enforcing their newfound power. The whole thing was absurd. A layer of bureaucracy dropped on what had once been a simple, stress-free setup. The first notice came in the mail like an unwelcome guest. The HOA wanted to inform us of the new policies and regulations we were now subject to. I remember laughing when I read it. My land wasn't part of their development. Neither was my friend's house. So we sent polite responses back, explaining that we weren't part of the HOA and had no intention of joining. But naturally, the HOA wasn't about to let it slide. They weren't just persistent, they were relentless. Over the years, their letters became more aggressive, dripping with demands and laced with barely concealed threats. It wasn't just simple requests or reminders anymore. It felt like they were trying to strong-arm us into submission. In response, our replies became sharper, less cordial, as we pushed back against their ever-growing list of grievances. What started as an annoyance soon spiraled into a full-blown war of words, escalating into multiple lawsuits that consumed time, money, and far too much mental energy. The back and forth seemed endless, with neither side willing to back down. They'd try to fine us for the most ridiculous things, like claiming my friend's house didn't meet their architectural standards, whatever that even meant, or complaining about an old non-registered vehicle he kept tucked away on his lot. It was obvious they were grasping at straws, desperate to assert control where they had none. Each time they dragged us to court, it felt like a bad rerun. We'd sit there, listening to their attorneys stumble through arguments about how we were somehow violating rules that didn't even apply to us. And every single time, the judge would toss their cases out, usually with a thinly veiled warning that they were wasting everyone's time. But did that stop them? Of course not. They'd regroup and come back with something new, anything they could dream up to try and make our lives miserable. One lawsuit claimed my friend's property line encroached on HOA land, which was laughable because we had decades-old surveys proving otherwise. Another time, they tried to argue that the maintenance shed he built for his tools was somehow an illegal structure, even though it wasn't visible from the new development, and didn't violate any county codes. Then there was the time they filed a noise complaint, claiming his occasional use of heavy equipment was disturbing the peaceful character of their neighborhood. Never mind that the neighborhood didn't even exist when we started using the land. The judge threw that one out too, pointing out that rural land use laws were on our side. You'd think at some point they'd take the hint, but no. They just kept finding new ways to drag us back into court, as if sheer persistence would make their baseless claims stick. Each case was a mix of absurdity and frustration, and each win felt hollow because we knew it was only a matter of time before the next round began. For a while, though, things quieted down. My friend eventually found a larger piece of land and decided to sell his house. When he moved, a couple of neighbors who had trailers parked on his property came to me. They asked if they could move their trailers onto my lots, offering the same deal. They'd keep the grass mowed and pay the taxes. I didn't see any harm in it at all. My 2 lots, which together made up just over 2 acres, were neatly enclosed by a sturdy chain-link fence. The land was just sitting there, unused, with nothing but grass and a few trees to show for it. It wasn't like I had big plans for the space. Plus, it wasn't as if what he wanted to store there would be an eyesore. One was a sleek enclosed race car trailer, polished and spotless, the kind of thing that would catch your eye for all the right reasons. The other was a massive high-end fifth-wheel camper, the kind people dream about taking on cross-country road trips. These weren't beat-up rusting heaps collecting dust. They were practically showpieces. So when he asked if he could store them on my lots, I figured, why not? It wasn't a big ask, and it wasn't going to bother anyone. Everything would be behind the fence, out of sight for anyone not looking for it. It seemed like a win-win. He got the storage space he needed, and I got the peace of knowing the land wasn't just sitting there completely idle. I didn't even hesitate to agree. It felt like the most logical, harmless arrangement. Then they asked if they could install a gate at their expense, and I said sure. I figured, why not? It was their money, and it made sense for them to secure their trailers. But the moment that gate went up, all hell broke loose. It was like the HOA had been lying in wait, ready to pounce. The letters started again, but this time they were laced with even more venom. They accused me of devaluing the neighborhood and threatened to sue again. They argued that the trailers and the gate made the subdivision look unattractive, as if they had any say over what I did on my own land. Before I knew it, we were back in court again, dragged into yet another round of the HOA's relentless crusade against us. This time, their lawyer strutted in, brimming with overconfidence, as if they'd finally stumbled upon the smoking gun that would take us down. They launched into a dramatic opening statement, trying to paint me as some kind of menace, a stubborn outsider hell-bent on ruining their perfect little neighborhood. The lawyer's tone was dripping with self-righteous indignation as they listed off their so-called grievances. To hear them tell it, my mere existence was an affront to their carefully curated suburban utopia. Meanwhile, I sat there, arms crossed, trying not to laugh at the sheer absurdity of it all. Their arguments were so far-fetched, it felt like I was trapped in a parody of a courtroom drama. My lawyer, on the other hand, was the picture of calm. He leaned back in his chair, barely bothering to take notes as the HOA's lawyer rambled on, digging themselves deeper with every exaggerated claim. When it was finally our turn, my lawyer stood up, adjusting his tie like he had all the time in the world. He started by calmly dismantling their case point by point. First, he brought up the property surveys, holding them up for everyone to see, and reminded the court that my land was never part of the HOA's jurisdiction. Then he introduced the county zoning records, which explicitly showed that none of their rules applied to my lots. It was like watching a master at work. He didn't raise his voice or rush through anything, just systematically shredded every one of their flimsy arguments. The best part came when he addressed the HOA's supposed distress. He pointed out with a hint of sarcasm that the unsightly items they were so concerned about, a high-end camper and a spotless race car trailer, weren't even visible from their neighborhood unless someone was going out of their way to look. "Are we seriously here?" he asked, turning to the judge. "Because my client's impeccably maintained property doesn't meet the HOA's imaginary standards for land they don't even own?" The judge's reaction said it all. He leaned back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose like he couldn't believe he had to sit through this nonsense. By the time my lawyer finished, the HOA's lawyer looked like they wanted to sink into the floor. The judge delivered his ruling with an almost audible sigh of exasperation, dismissing the case and once again reminding the HOA that they had no authority over my property. As we packed up to leave, the judge threw in one final comment directed squarely at the HOA's lawyer. "I strongly recommend your clients consider the limits of their jurisdiction before bringing something like this to my courtroom again." It was about as close to an eye roll as you could get from the bench, and it was the perfect ending to yet another pointless ordeal. His ruling was clear. My property wasn't part of the HOA, there were no zoning restrictions on it, and I could do whatever I wanted there as long as it was legal. case dismissed. You'd think that would be the end of it. But no, after the hearing, one of the trailer owners jokingly suggested I should start renting out spots on my lots. At first, I laughed it off, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If people were willing to pay for storage, why not? It wasn't like I was doing anything else with the land, and the extra income could easily cover the taxes and maybe even some security upgrades. Word got around quickly. Before I knew it, I had 5 people interested in renting space for their trailers and boats. The original trailer owners even offered to keep maintaining the grass and help with any small upkeep if I went through with it. It seemed like a solid plan. But of course, the HOA wasn't going to let me make a move without a fight. Even though the court had already ruled in my favor, I could feel their eyes watching every step I took. Every time I drove past the subdivision, I'd see a couple of the board members standing on their porches, glaring like hawks. One afternoon, I got a visit from an HOA representative. She came to my door with a clipboard and an attitude, demanding to know what I was planning to do with the land. When I reminded her that it was none of their business, she huffed and tried to play the sympathy card, talking about the integrity of the community and how my actions were dividing the neighborhood. I didn't even bother to hide my laughter. "Lady, your HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over my property. You can keep wasting your time sending letters and filing lawsuits, but the judge has already made it clear you've got no leg to stand on." She stormed off, but I knew that wasn't the end of it. Sure enough, within weeks I started getting more letters. This time, they weren't just threatening lawsuits, they were threatening to report me to the county for violations. What violations, I had no idea, because as far as I knew, I wasn't breaking any laws. But the HOA was grasping at straws, hoping to scare me into backing down. The stress was mounting, but a part of me was determined not to let them win. I started drafting rental agreements for the trailer spots, figuring if I was going to keep getting dragged into court, I might as well make it worth my while. But the nagging question remained, just how far was the HOA willing to go to stop me? And how many more trips to court would I have to endure before they finally got the message? Before turning your lots into storage areas, you should tread carefully because zoning issues can quickly become a problem. If your land is zoned commercial, you'll probably have more freedom to proceed without interference. However, if it's zoned residential, things could get messy. Nearby HOAs or even the city might decide you're violating zoning laws, even if your plans seem harmless. The last thing you want is to be blindsided by a notice or fine because someone complained. This is why it's essential to go directly to your local zoning office or city planning department. Learn the specifics of your property's classification and what's allowed. It might save you a mountain of headaches later on. If the HOA insists on dragging you back to court over baseless claims, it's time to push back harder. You should consider asking the judge for a cease and desist order to stop them from wasting your time and money. These endless lawsuits are nothing more than harassment disguised as legal action, and it's clear they aren't listening to reason. A formal court order could send a strong message that their antics won't be tolerated anymore. It won't just protect you. It'll force them to think twice before filing another frivolous claim. No one should have to deal with this level of unnecessary drama. You should start documenting every interaction with the HOA, including their letters, emails, and even the court rulings. Keeping a detailed record will strengthen your case and show a clear pattern of harassment. If they keep pushing, you might even have grounds to countersue for abuse of process or harassment. This could hold them accountable and potentially recover some of the costs they've forced you to incur. You don't have to be their victim. Stand your ground and show them you won't be bullied.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.